Thank you, Philippe. And hello, everyone. Welcome to VMDR Live. So, VMDR is live, very exciting. As Philippe mentioned earlier, a lot of hard work by our engineers, our operations team, product team, really going into making this solution happen in difficult times, as all of you are going through as well, working from home, and a lot of excitement in the teams to get feedback on this new game-changing approach towards vulnerability management. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the solution and then give a live demo. And as I mentioned, really excited to get feedback because this is a whole new approach towards vulnerability management. Effective vulnerability management, as you all know, really is made up of these four components: asset inventory being the first one, vulnerability assessment, prioritization, and patch management. And really at the end starts with effective asset inventory program. So being able to discover all assets that are on the environment in real time. Obviously, we know CMDBs are not working well at all because of the manual nature. So there needs to be a system that is continuously assessing and monitoring the network and bringing all of that information, not just the hardware, but also the software asset inventory. After that, you need to be able to look at all of the vulnerabilities and configuration issues on these devices in a continuous manner, right? It's not a one-time, just a scan-based solution, which is done on a periodic basis, as has been done in the past, is not effective. There needs to be an approach where there can be a continuous assessment of the entire environment, especially in hybrid environment, not just your servers. Vulnerability management has expanded quite a bit across the infrastructure, whether it's cloud, containers, ICS devices, all kinds of different types of devices connecting to the network. So that ability to continuously have a visibility on the vulnerability and configuration posture is an important cornerstone of an effective vulnerability management program. After that, today, given the huge amount of vulnerabilities that are being detected, when you have this continuous approach, there obviously has to be a very threat and risk-oriented approach towards prioritizing the vulnerabilities which you want to put your efforts first. And that has to be done with the context of the threat that those vulnerabilities pose. As we all know, not all vulnerabilities pose threats. Also, the ability to bring the threat factor of that vulnerability along with the asset context. So a lot of times just saying that this vulnerability by itself is a high criticality vulnerability is not enough if you don't have the context of the asset to prioritize it, right? So of course you want to fix all vulnerabilities, but how do you prioritize the one? So bringing that asset context and correlating that is really important. And then of course all of this is of not much value if you cannot really do the patching and the response capabilities effectively. And today, in most organizations, all of these are managed with different tools. The four things that I've highlighted here, there are completely different tools. A lot of time, different teams are involved, and a lot of time is spent in just trying to get these tools to talk to each other to be effective, and going from discovering a brand new asset to assessing its vulnerabilities, configs, looking at its threats, prioritizing and actually patching it. And because of the way these tools are completely independent and the way they work with each other, there's a lot of time today that is spent in trying to fix those vulnerabilities. And that's the time that, of course, those devices are exposed with those vulnerabilities to a risk. And so mitigating at that and bringing down the time it takes to remediate is very important. And it's really highlighted very well with this WannaCry example, where you had the CVE for that particular vulnerability came out in March. This was just recently, in 2017, I think. And you can see this curve that after the CVE came out, our customers, and this is data that we have put together, looking at the patterns that we see from a patching perspective and from a vulnerability detection perspective. Those customers, so the initial check was an authenticator check. Those customers who were doing authenticator scanning, we saw a big spike in the detections, and then some people had good programs, so they were patching it slowly and you can see that curve sort of dip when people went into the regular patching workflow. In about a month, you had Eternal Blue exploit that came out. So now there was an exploit for this particular vulnerability. And then our engineers were able to reverse engineer it and create a remote detection. As soon as we had a remote detection, there was a big spike in the number of detections. Just to again highlight that there are still a lot of organizations out there that are not doing authenticated checks and continuous checks with agents, and so the detection rate went up, but then you can see the remediation still sort of stayed flat because people were not prioritizing their vulnerabilities properly, and that led to a good amount of time. About another month went by, and after that, when WannaCry hit, which was weaponizing that exploit to actually cause damage, that's when everybody got into the emergency patching phase and really tried hard to bring those numbers down. As you can see here, very quickly those numbers started to go down significantly, but which meant that because of the lack of proper highlighting and prioritization of that vulnerability, there was while of course when the vulnerability came out, patching would have been a lot effective, but because a lot of organizations did not have the tools to highlight the fact that now there was an exploit for a particular vulnerability, which makes it higher priority. You can see that there was a good amount of time which was lost in that time to remediate, to be able to do a good job at remediation. And so these different tools working well with each other, prioritizing things is very important, and it really needs an approach where you collect a lot of the information, bring it to the platform, correlate it, and then be able to crunch all of the information that is out on the asset, the vulnerability, to come up with something that effectively reduces this time to remediate. And that's precisely where we are excited about our recent launch of VMDR, which is something that brings that asset inventory, vulnerability management, threat prioritization, and the response capability into one single app, focusing on a true risk-based approach, and not just an approach of basically taking a broad sweep for everything. And this is really combining, Qualys VMDR really combines the ability to do a precise job at looking at all of the inventory, discovering all of the assets, whether they are managed or unmanaged, organizing them. This is a very important part. Just having the asset information is not good enough if you cannot attribute to certain assets owners certain applications. And so our dynamic rule-based tagging that is included as part of VMDR does a job of using rules that can be created to automatically keep these assets organized by tagging them as information is coming in and changing on them. Of course, with the agents, there is the ability to do a continuous assessment of vulnerabilities and configurations. So you're not just reliant on scan-based approach, which is a periodic approach. So that is included as part of VMDR. And also in that workflow, we have added the ability to look at threats, prioritize those threats with a new context engine, which is taking the threat of the vulnerability itself, the asset priority, criticality, and the various elements on the asset, which is the attack surface of that asset, to be able to come up with something that is very unique in the way that it's being done, because we are bringing so many different pieces of information together. And then the last part that VMDR really brings is precisely identifying what remediation action needs to be taken and what patches need to be deployed. And then, of course, you can expand that by leveraging the Qualys agents to also deploy those exact specific patches. VMDR also comes with a very interesting capability, which is a threat feed and some very unique classification of threats that help provide organizations with the ability to do analysis of threats according to their environment. So as I've listed here, there are many different types of real-time threat indicators that are now included with VMDR, where we can highlight vulnerabilities that are denial of service, and those may only be important if it is a external facing asset versus an internal facing asset. You have things like 0 days public exploit, so anything that's a public exploit, easily exploitable, something that has dark web chatter but not yet exploitable. So all of these different elements are now brought together as part of an integrated threat feed, and is completely integrated through the VMDR workflow in the different aspects of dashboard and reporting. And also one of the things we include here is the machine learning prediction. Again, this is not a end all be all capability here that some of the other providers are talking about machine learning as the solution for everything. It is one of the indicators, threat indicators, that needs to be taken into account when prioritizing vulnerabilities. The other important aspect, which again is very unique that we are bringing, is the asset context and looking at the attack surface. So it's not just enough to say that there is a vulnerability on an asset and that vulnerability is exploitable. It's also important to look at the individual asset to say, is that vulnerability on the running kernel? Is it on the running service? So you may have a vulnerability, but the service is not running. That obviously changes the equation in terms of the risk. There are vulnerabilities that could already be mitigated by configuration settings on the device, so they don't need to be prioritized higher. A database, as an example, will be a much higher priority to fix if it's an internet-facing database. Many other things, like just the age of the scan, as an example, is how long has that vulnerability been detected on that specific asset, because of course from a statistical probability perspective, if something is out there for longer, it's going to get as a higher probability that it will get exploited than something that just was discovered or came onto the asset just a day or so ago. Patch management as part of the VMDR solution is very, very exciting, because it really cuts down on the time that it takes to go from vulnerabilities to patches. I mean, all of you are today dealing with this, where giving a threat or a prioritized report, even after doing the prioritization to the IT teams, trying to figure out how a vulnerability maps to a precise patch is something that is extremely difficult to do. And that is something that with VMDR we are simplifying significantly by bringing a solution that does not only OS patches but also does third-party patches. It leverages the correlation of vulnerabilities to specific patches, which I'll talk about a little bit. And then being a completely 100% cloud-based approach, the patch deployment can happen directly from the CDNs of the vendors without requiring to go through VPN, as traditional enterprise solutions require that to be done through on-prem solutions that have VPNs. And today, of course, with the remote workforce, you can see that that's not a option anymore, because you just cannot have hundreds of gigabytes of patches going through the VPN. So there's a lot of additional advantages that the VMDR patch management capability brings into play. Another aspect of VMDR is the superseding patches that are built in. That information about the superseding patches is really important, because as you can see some of the examples here, you had the Google Chrome patch that came out, which essentially supersedes like 28 different Chrome versions from 2019 alone, covering 177 vulnerabilities. And and you can see the other example here of Internet Explorer, very similar. And the traditional vulnerability management, the way if you look at each vulnerability and then try to look for the patch, they end up being hundreds of patches, if not more, that have to be deployed individually. But that correlation of being able to take the information about the vulnerability, the patch, and the supersedence is something that now is built directly into VMDR, which really saves a lot of time when trying to figure out precisely what patch needs to be deployed there. Another aspect here is the patch identification. So being able to automatically identify the patch. So a lot of times, even if you actually know what patch needs to be deployed. So in this case, we had the .NET patch that was released in January 2020, which fixed 3 CVEs. But if you look at based on the combination of the operating system and the version of .NET that is deployed, the architecture of the system and all of that, it was a 64-bit, 32-bit, the language of the particular version of the operating system. There's like 34 different KBs that are required to be deployed to fix that one particular patch, as an example. So IT administrators really spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to take the information about the vulnerability. So it's easy to say, okay, go fix this vulnerability, but how do you translate that into the actual patch that needs to be deployed on the individual machine? And as part of VMDR, that precise assessment with our agent is something that is another unique piece of VMDR, where we actually go and look at each and every individual asset to know exactly which file needs to be deployed on that. And that really ends up saving a lot of time in getting to the remediation aspect of the entire process. Another thing that's very unique with VMDR is the ability to have a very simple asset-based model. So now we have really simplified this model. We have included with the simple asset-based license, we have included unlimited number of virtual scanners, agents, passive scanning. So how you assess the vulnerability, you can leverage many different ways to find and discover all the various vulnerabilities. We include a plethora of different types of inventory capabilities that cover everything from cloud, container, mobile devices. Categorization, normalization is included part of this simple asset-based model. Configuration assessment against CIS benchmarks, which is very important. A lot of times, just because a patch is deployed does not mean that the asset is not exploitable or vulnerable. Continuous monitoring so that you can be proactive. That's included as part of the simple asset-based pricing as well. And then the last part is also very important, which is the CI/CD integration is included in VMDR. Which is not just the ability to detect vulnerabilities in your runtime, but also how to leverage Jenkins plugins and others to make this as part of your pipeline. Today with DevOps driving a lot of the process, how can you leverage VMDR to reduce the number of vulnerabilities that are seen at runtime? This is something that is also included as part of VMDR, which is available now. So enough talk. Now it's time for a demo, and I'm going to go through a few different examples to give you a quick overview of the power of VMDR end to end, all the way from asset discovery to the ability to deploy the patches as well. So let's switch over to the demo. So here you can see the brand new UI that we are rolling out for everybody who's upgrading to VMDR. And as I mentioned earlier, the 4 pillars of effective vulnerability management program, which is identifying assets, discovering vulnerabilities, prioritizing your threats, and deploying the patches. So this UI uniquely brings all of that together in a single workflow, in a single app. And there's a nice little video in that circle that you can see to get an idea of how the whole thing works end to end, but it's pretty easy workflows. Of course, as I mentioned, part of VMDR, the first aspect is identifying all of your assets and being able to do that with multiple different ways. At the bottom, there's scanners, passive scanners, so many additional ways to get your inventory. But we can start off by giving a demo of how easy it is to leverage the Qualys Cloud Agent, because it brings a lot of rich inventory information from the devices in real time, especially now with remote endpoints being everywhere, and provide that unique visibility. So let me see if I can zoom this thing a little bit. And I highly recommend that if you can do that in your browser, yeah, there you go. So if you can do that in your browser to make it full screen, you definitely should do that. So here you can see a little bit better the UI. You can start off by clicking download Cloud Agent. Unlimited Cloud Agents are included for inventory for free. Let's take an example of Windows. Very easy, simple, lightweight 3 megabyte agent that you can download and essentially distribute this with a very simple command line argument. There's a few ways you can do that. We have customers who are using existing solutions for deployment of software, cloud-based solutions like Intune, and a few others. So we have a blog out there that explains many different ways to get the agent installed. Once it's installed, the good thing is that it auto updates, it keeps itself updated, and you never really have to go and update the agent again. So it's a completely self-updating and self-managed agent. And if you want to take a look at it, there's also the other section on Azure Security Center agent, which is built in. So that's another aspect of the agent installation. But let's focus on the Windows one. So once you get those agents installed, you will be able to come back here and it'll start populating your dashboard, which I'm going to show. That dashboard essentially brings together all of the various elements of asset inventory throughout your entire enterprise in one single view. So it starts off with a distribution of all of your operating systems, gives a category breakdown of cloud assets, network devices, laptops, printers, any of your IoT type devices, desktops. So everything is brought together in a single view. You can see the complete distribution, categorization. So as I mentioned earlier too, the big part of what we do, our inventory, is not just collect raw information and show that. We highly normalize and categorize that information, which is why today when you look at the remote endpoints as an example, you can quickly see here all of your client hardware and all of your client operating systems. So what kind of actual laptops are out there across the entire remote workforce? As an example, you can see that across different models, how many assets do you have? Operating systems the same way. Windows 10, do you have any outdated Windows 7 as you have in this case? Are all of your Mac agents updated to Catalina or Mac devices updated to the latest version as well? If you scroll down here, you can see all of your remote endpoints on a map, because being a cloud-based solution, we can keep track of where these devices are and show them in near real time. Before I go there, another interesting thing here is today you see there's a lot of software out there that is malware, rather I should say, out there that is targeting VPN vulnerabilities. And so the inventory that we have brings together all of the VPN endpoints that are installed inside the network that are being targeted or that have vulnerabilities. So you can very quickly get the full inventory of those as well. Now let's go on to the remote endpoints here. If you go over the map, you'll see the distribution of all the devices that you have in the different locations, different cities out there. We have a few in Paris. There's a big operation in Pune, so there's quite a few over there out in India. We could have one salesperson out in Japan, so there's that one single device out in Tokyo as an example, that you can keep track of where that device is and where it's connecting from. It's interesting, I see a device out here in Rio. Not sure if one of our employees is out there in during the lockdown, or maybe it's a stolen laptop that's popped up in Rio. You can easily drill down further and investigate that. Furthermore, if you look at some of the client application categories, there's more detail out there in terms of productivity software, collaboration software, databases, end of life. You can track your overall security hygiene. The collaboration software, that part is quite interesting because that includes a lot of your licenses that are being used for everything from Word to PowerPoint to even collaboration includes all of your video conferencing software as an example. So let me scroll up here and then see if I can click on the notebooks. So there's about 1,200 or so notebooks. Clicking on that will give the latest notebooks that are connecting, where they are, what's on those notebooks. We categorize very quickly on our own, provide information about the operating system, so you can see the Windows versus the Macs. But the really cool part of how all of this gets connected in a single workflow is the ability to then take these queries, the QQL queries that are part of our Elasticsearch which I mentioned earlier, that's indexing the 3 trillion data points. You can take that and create a tag out of it, so you can use it later during your report. So in this case, I'm creating a simple remote endpoints tag based on anything that's a computer, and the category is notebook. So that way I can track all of them throughout the entire workflow. Once you've done that, you can switch over to the software. So this is one thing I mentioned earlier, that our agent really brings a lot of rich telemetry information about install software, and then we use the normalization categorization on our backend to explain exactly which of the software is security software, which is application content, what is productivity, and then look at all the vendors as an example. So being able to ensure that we can see across the vendor the different type of software out there. Can quickly come in here and categorize them. So here I'm categorizing that, and with that I can see that out of the 46,000 plus software, there's collaboration and web conferencing, right? So as I mentioned earlier, collaboration category has different types of subcategories, and one of the categorization here is web conferencing. So for 1200 laptops, there's 3400 web conferencing software installed across those laptops, which is very interesting information. And from a breakdown perspective, there's about 1100 of them are BlueJeans, there's Cisco WebEx, and as you know today, there's a lot of talk about the vulnerabilities that were discovered in some of the Zoom video conferencing software. So in this case, there's 187 Zoom video conferencing apps installed across those laptops. Clicking on that will bring us to a detailed list of all of the various versions and how many devices out of those 187 are at the different versions. So I believe the 4.6.8 and below were the ones that were vulnerable. So in this example, you can see that majority of the apps have been updated to the latest version, so that makes it a lot more secure. Again, I'm going to create a tag here so that we can use that later during the workflow. So here we're creating a tag called Zoom endpoints, and here you can see the simple query that again, as you notice that the query was created by just clicking through, and I didn't even have to type through for that query. That's how intuitive that UI is. So once you create the tag, then you can track it and use that tag later. So now let's go switch to the vulnerability workflow. So this is where I had mentioned going into the VMDR workflow. This is one of the new cool things we are releasing with VMDR, is completely customizable and unlimited dashboarding and ability to create real-time live widgets with trending information built in. So here, as part of the new VMDR interface, this is something that we're rolling out to pretty much all customers. Even though you are not a VMDR customer, this specific dashboarding capability will be pushed out to everybody over the next few weeks, because it really changes how you track your vulnerabilities and how you do vulnerability management directly out of the box. So this default dashboard that we have built shows all the open vulnerabilities, fixed vulnerabilities, your enabled, disabled, rather ignored and disabled vulnerabilities, tracking the agents. You'll see a lot more discussion that we do about the age of these vulnerabilities. So we can look at the age of these detections, how long ago were a lot of these vulnerabilities detected. The favorite things that people like to do, your top 10 vulnerabilities, your top 10 hosts, which tags those hosts belong to, being able to drill down and find out which host has the most number of vulnerabilities. It's all extremely customizable and very easy to build multiple widgets on a dashboard. I'm actually going to show you with an example. So if I go here, let me pick a name for this and let me create the query. So it's a very simple query. Essentially anything that is a vulnerability that is found in the last 30 days and has a CVSS base score between 7 and 10. And the first time that it was ever found was in the last 30 days. So this excludes vulnerabilities that were found a long time ago and maybe have been opened or reopened or whatever it is. So very granular ability to create these widgets. And as you saw, immediately it shows up with the count. I can check a box, and this is one of my favorite features. You don't have to pull the data out into some other Tableau or some other places like Splunk or any other SIM solutions to try to do trending on this information. That is automatically now built in as part of this new interface. You can go in here, just check the box, and then say add to dashboard, and that widget will now be on the dashboard in a matter of seconds. So now when you scroll down here, let me scroll down here, and there you go, you see the widget right there. So going back up, I'm going to show another example which is a little bit more in depth, but another example of creating a widget by using the example of the CVE, which was the crypto API, Microsoft crypto API vulnerability that came out, I think, last month, where it was one of the really key vulnerabilities that needed to be highly prioritized, and everybody wanted to keep track of the burn down of how quickly they were patching that particular vulnerability. So by being able to create that widget very easily. And another thing I wanted to mention, if you look here at the top, you can actually view the information, change the widget types as a pie chart or as a table or a bar chart very quickly just by clicking through those options. I'm going to focus right now on a number widget. The cool thing here is that you can basically create very easy ways to draw attention for those who are tracking these different types of tracking widgets. You can really click on each one of those and then be able to find out the detailed information. But then if you have a lot of widgets on a dashboard, how do you find out which ones are the ones that need your attention? So you can very easily come in here and then create very simple rules that say, maybe in the case that the number of endpoints in my environment is greater than a certain value. So in this case, I'm going to take the value of 10. So if the number of devices that have that is over 10, then it needs to turn yellow. Now, if I say that the number of devices goes beyond the 10, and I can take another example here. So let's take the value here of saying that now if the number of devices, as we are tracking, the widgets are getting updated. So let's say 25 is a number, then it becomes orange. And you can go and add additional colors to get information, and then you can track the historic trending directly out of the box. And that's how easy it is. I could easily add another one here in different colors. But because these widgets are live, they're continuously tracking the values. And as soon as those values change, you can see the color change and draw your attention. And then we're adding additional capabilities soon to be able to do alerting based on these thresholds as well. So I added that widget here, so you can see the crypto API widget is added as well. Once you've done that, the next thing here is really looking at the third aspect of it. Is you have a way now to detect vulnerabilities in real time, and a way to keep track of those vulnerabilities by using these dashboards and widgets. But then the next aspect of this is really going to be about tracking threats. So one of the things that VMDR brings as part of this workflow is the ability to have a live feed of the latest threats that are impacting your organization. And that's the key term here, your organization. So as our threat researchers are doing research and adding different types of threats as part of that feed, the big aspect that is unique here is the ability for the platform to go in and immediately, as soon as this threat is pushed out, is to go and detect how many exact assets in your environment are impacted by that. So sometimes there could be a feed that has no assets that are impacted in your environment. In other cases, you can see on the left on the high feed here that there's the Mac OS, there's the Firefox vulnerability here. You can look at the Zoom vulnerability. So the UNC path injection vulnerability, and I will talk about that later. Now, you want to fix what's on the left-hand side first, because that's exploitable, and we talked about the real-time threat indicators, which I'll showcase a little bit later as well, in addition to this. But once all of that is done, you can also start looking at the next level of prioritization, which is, it's not maybe a easily exploitable vulnerability in the wild, but you know that when there is a POC exploit, and that's why we kind of put this as a medium one, where the fact that a vulnerability now has some sort of a POC available, which means that it's probably the next step is going to be some sort of an exploit is going to come out in the wild, maybe as part of an exploit kit or something. So very easy ways to keep track. And again, the focus is on showing what is impacted in your organization, so that instead of just saying that this is a critical vulnerability, you can really focus on saying how does it impact. Now, the next thing after you've looked at, kept track of the threats, is how do you operationalize this information and the RTIs and the asset context. And this is the really big cool thing that we have added, is leveraging the platform updates we have done, is to create a prioritization workflow that very easily leverages the tags that we created earlier. As I mentioned, again, to reiterate, those tags are kept up to date automatically by the system. So if new assets come on board and those assets have those tags, have those attributes, those tags will automatically be updated. So I'm going to go through a few examples here. So first example that I'm going to go through here is pick one of those tags that we had created earlier. So in this case, I'm going to pick the tag that we had created, which is the remote endpoint tag. Once I click the tag, it's immediately going to go and fetch the information to say, as you see in this case, that there's 1.68K assets that are part of that tag, which and on all of those assets, there's 34,000 vulnerabilities detected, and you can see the CVSS breakdown. But then we start to bring all the relevant information about that, right? So what's the detection age? And you can select that from here, whether you want to only focus on vulnerabilities that were detected a certain number of days ago, or then you come in here, you can see the real-time threat indicators. So there's a lot of them. There's 0 days, and again, these are very focused. So there's different ways that we provide customers to customize this prioritization to their environment. So we do some analysis, and additionally, there are things that the customers can choose here. So there's high lateral movement, high data loss, denial of service, and things like that. And so, the point here is that a lot of times other solutions tend to have issues with figuring out how to prioritize, because denial of service doesn't really make sense to prioritize that on a remote endpoint, as an example. But an exploit kit vulnerability, that actually makes a lot of sense to prioritize on an endpoint, because remember, when you have these remote endpoints that are out there, as soon as that device is now connected to the internet at home, it's being used by the kids to download PDFs, whatever it is. Exploit kits that are out there are actually leveraging vulnerabilities, and we keep track of all of the vulnerabilities that are in all of these popular exploit kits. And those you want to mitigate first, because it's very easy to send someone, embed an exploit kit as part of a PDF or an Excel sheet or a video, send it to someone, they open it. If the vulnerability is there, then they can own the machine immediately, right? So focusing for remote endpoints on vulnerabilities that are part of exploit kits gives a lot of granularity in picking what prioritization needs to be done. And then on the right hand side, you see all of the attack surface options. So we'll go a little bit more in depth through the rest of the demos. But here, again, because I talked so much, it took some time, but otherwise it's a very fast, within a couple seconds, we are going to go and do the full analysis to say, out of the 1,600 assets that are part of the remote endpoints, the ones that have vulnerabilities that are used in exploit kits is, you can see here on the left hand side, only 24. So you really need to focus on only those 24 prioritized assets. And there are 27 unique vulnerabilities on those 24 assets that need to be patched. And of course, to patch those, we have done the translation. I talked about that earlier, from the vulnerability directly to the exact patch on the exact machine. So there's 10 patches that need to be deployed across 24 assets to fix those 27 unique vulnerabilities. And that's really the power of what VMDR is about. It brings you the very quick analysis, prioritize with very quick, easy customizations as needed, give you the list of all of those vulnerabilities. You can look at it in different ways. You can look at it as vulnerabilities, you can look at it as patches, you can look at it as assets. So in this case, if I click on patches, now I can see the same list, but from a patch perspective. And so I can say, oh, this Firefox patch needs to be deployed. I can go ahead and say patch that now. But in the simplest workflow here is without having to worry about the different operating systems and the different versions and the architectures or anything like that. The big part of the response capability here is to have that ability to directly click here and say, add this to a new job, or kick off, create a new job. It will take some defaults, create a new job here. You can edit some of these things if you want from the asset perspective or the actual patches that are going to be deployed. But now we pick the tag, we pick the 10 patches that need to be deployed across all of those devices. And then you just have to go hit save. And now that patch will start rolling out to all of those endpoints as soon as they are connected to the internet. So again, remember, no need to go through VPNs because we pull the patches directly from the CDN vendors. And it's a full capability patch module with everything from being able to provide messages for what they should see when it comes up for a reboot, as an example, or to be able to schedule, to be able to roll back patches. So as you explore that, you will see that this is a full patch deployment capability that can really replace any of your entrenched patching modules as well. So once that is done here, let's go and take another example. So I will pick another tag. So let's take web services tag here, right? So web servers, I should say. Once you pick the tag, immediately it's going to go to do the same analysis, find the number of hosts that are impacted, find the total vulnerabilities that are impacted. So you will see here there are 75 assets that are impacted. You can see the age of the detections. And in this case, we're picking some RTIs like active attacks and vulnerable, because those are more concerning on your web servers as an example. As soon as you prioritize, it's going to go and showcase, essentially bring the number of assets that are actually impacted. Now, if you see here, there are 75 total assets and 68 of those based on the default RTIs need to be prioritized and patched. However, you can say now that in your environment, and because these are web servers, you care also about the denial of service threat indicator, so that we will go and figure out which of those. Now it's actually increased to 73 because we also added denial of service. Now you can take off some of these and you can say, I don't care about vulnerable, and the number will go down. But when you talk about the attack surface, remember I mentioned the attack surface is essentially a way to figure out the context of the asset and the vulnerability on them. So now, while there may be a lot of web servers and there are many different ways to detect vulnerabilities, you can detect it with agent, you can detect the vulnerability with scan, authenticated, unauthenticated scans. One of the things that you want to really prioritize here is to say, go to the attack surface and say, I only want to look at the remotely discoverable vulnerabilities, right? Which is vulnerabilities that are on my external facing web servers that don't need any authentication to detect them. Those are the highest priority. So now that goes down to 29. So these 29 assets are web servers that have vulnerabilities that can be remotely detected without authentication. And there are 4 patches available here that can be deployed. So there was a vulnerability that came out, I think that impacted Tomcat recently, called Ghost Cat. So here you can see very quickly that we can pick Tomcat on and we can patch Tomcat leveraging the Qualys agent if you have the agent on the machine already. So very easy to create a job. So I'm going to go here. In this case, I will say add this to an existing job. And all right, are the demo guards going to give up on me? Oh, that does not look good. Oh, it's coming back. Okay. All right, just so you know that it's real. We're still a couple things we need to focus and work out on this, but overall it's working really well. Let's take another example. So let me clear out the web servers and let's pick another tag that I had created earlier. So in this case, I'm going to say it's a data center asset. So it's not just web servers, there's a data center, and we pick the tag, and there are many assets in there. There may be routers, switches, databases, all kinds of different things, web servers. So you have San Diego data center. Okay, let me see. Oh, here, there you go. So now it's going to go and figure out that there's 242 assets in that. In this case, I actually care about the high data loss type of threat indicators, right? So now I can go and say, let me click and say include all of the vulnerabilities that are known to be related to high data loss. And so now the prioritized assets is 56 out of the 242. So there's a 56 assets that need to be focused on, 94 unique vulnerabilities that can be fixed with 23 patches. Now, how do you look at the attack surface and narrow this down even further to say what is the first batch of things that you need to focus on? So one of the things we bring as part of VMDR now is the ability to know which of the vulnerabilities that are detected and the threats that are out there actually are unauthenticated exploits. So we talked about discovering vulnerabilities, but just because you remotely discover a vulnerability doesn't mean that it can be exploited remotely. Some of the vulnerabilities do require you to be on the box for exploitation. So now I can very quickly flip that and say, okay, I only want to focus on the ones that can be remotely exploited without authentication. So that brings that number down to 45 assets that need to be focused on. I can go further to say, once that exploitation has happened, which vulnerabilities actually lead to elevated privilege escalation. So different exploits do different things. So just because a vulnerability gets exploited may not necessarily always mean that there's a direct path to a privilege escalation. Here, because we bring that attack surface and we bring that additional information on the specific assets, now we can say, look at things like, show me only vulnerabilities that are on the running kernel, or only the ones that are on a running service. Don't show me things that are not on the running service or not on the running kernel, right? You find a vulnerability, it's on a kernel that's actually on the disk, not loaded in memory. That's not a high priority thing that you need to fix. Even if it was an exploitable vulnerability, that's not your first order. Here, anything that is unauthenticated exploitation, and if the exploitation leads to high privilege escalation, that's the list that you want to focus on. So now that's down to 44 hosts that need 13 vulnerabilities to be fixed with 2 patches that can be deployed. So again, pretty easily you can go and add that tag. I think we need to work on this messaging here. It needs to give a confirmation message when I click add, but we'll work on that. So next one I'm taking is an example of a database server. So here I pick database server, go click prioritize now. Here it's a very simple use case that I'm looking at, right? There's 219 database servers across the environment. And that's fine. There's databases are used for many different things, and 212 of those really need focus on them. But what I really care about is any database that is has a vulnerability or is known to be associated with malware, or current active attacks are going on against that particular vulnerability on that asset. But then I want to focus to say the first order is, what is the worst thing that can happen is a database that has one of these threat indicators is actually internet facing. So just by flipping that, because we bring the asset context, you can very quickly say, now that narrows down to 24 assets that have databases that are that have vulnerabilities that are remotely facing to the internet, and those absolutely need to be patched first. So here's another example of how you can leverage that ability to create those patches and push those patches out. Again, end to end, going from the asset identification through the tags, detection of the vulnerabilities, prioritization, leveraging the RTIs, and then the response, leveraging the patching capability, all brought together in a single workflow. So here, I can add this to an existing job. So, all right, so I go back to where we started again. So this is the last example I want to show, because this is again highlights what I mentioned earlier, that it's not just about the vulnerabilities, it's also about configurations and configuration related issues that cause, let me see the endpoints. Yeah, that's the Zoom endpoints that I picked earlier. So with that, now I can focus on things that maybe you cannot patch very easily, or patches are available but cannot be patched in the normal way. Zoom has an interesting way that they patch the vulnerability. So, and they did a fantastic job of very quickly coming out with a patch so that you could deploy, or because they have the apps, they can auto update the patching. So here in this case, when I hit prioritize now on my Zoom endpoints, here I'm selecting a different set of threat indicators that I care about, right? And so those are the you have the UNC injection vulnerability that came out, and they patched it very quickly. One of the ways that they have been patching this is that when you join the meeting, and after that meeting has finished, and you quit the meeting, at that time they show that there is a patch and they ask you to patch now, and they do patch that. But that does leave a certain amount of time when those devices are vulnerable, because if someone sends you something to click on, and that can then leverage the vulnerability to actually try and exploit that vulnerability for to get the information about the hash, and you can read up more information about that. But what happens in that case is that now you are still vulnerable, and the patch is being rolled out, but it's being rolled out in a manner that after you have finished the meeting, it will show up for the end users. In that case, there are other ways, and this is just one example, but many times, you have the 7 monkeys vulnerabilities, where you can mitigate that vulnerability with network level authentication, enabling a configuration option, which then mitigates the vulnerability. So a lot of times what happens is that just because a vulnerability detected by the scanner does not mean that the device is vulnerable, because the vulnerability can be mitigated by a configuration change on the box that has been done, that's in place. So if the configuration is in place, then you don't really prioritize that vulnerability. So one of the additional attack surface options we provide here is the ability to say, only show me the vulnerabilities that are not mitigated by configuration. So which means the vulnerability is detected by the agent or the scanner, but it has not been mitigated by a configuration change. So in the case of the 7 monkeys vulnerability, if the network level authentication was enabled, we would consider that the vulnerability is mitigated because of the configuration change. So in that case, we would not highlight that as a high priority vulnerability. So in the case of Zoom, is the same with NTLM, right? So you can basically go and check that, and so now it's going to show you only the vulnerabilities that are not mitigated by a configuration change. And so in this case, it's going to show you the configuration change that is needed. So it's not just about patching, but also if there are other ways that you can mitigate that vulnerability. So in this case, essentially it's option to say that you can actually restrict NTLM from going to remote servers, right? If you don't have that device allowing NTLM traffic to a remote server, then you are much better protected, because you're potentially not leaking your NTLM hash in that case, because it cannot go to a remote server. So that simple turning on that capability. So this is something that is in the works right now, is that extending that ability to take response action, going beyond applying patches, but also to create jobs leveraging the agent to fix misconfigurations on the box. So here you can create the job, pick the assets, and then you have the controls, and then you can go and say, apply that particular fix, and now you can, that job is going to go and execute, and is going to work on changing the configuration. So while the patch has not yet been deployed, you are still better off from a true risk perspective. And that's what it comes down to, right? Everything that I have shown here is a risk-based approach towards vulnerability management. It's not just saying I use some machine learning, and that's one of the RTIs here, which is a machine learning predicted high vulnerability, which is just one of the RTIs, right? So we leverage machine learning in the right place to be able to say that this particular thing is something that can based on machine learning is highlighted as a vulnerability that can potentially become deadly in the future. But again, you want to focus on fixing what right now is actually exploitable, and then go to the machine learning aspect of it. So again, that flexibility, bringing that risk-based approach to really look at in your environment, and also within your environment, as I showed, different tags have different risk factors, and different RTIs are important to them, and different attack surface options are important based on your assets. So very flexible, very fast, backed by that super fast Elasticsearch database. We're able to really create different prioritization reports very quickly. And in the top, you will see that there is, on the top right, there is ability to export these to a dashboard. So we have created a new type of widget, which is the VMDR tracking widget. So because yes, you have your report and you create the job, but how do you track that particular the report that you just ran in a live manner? So again, leveraging the dashboard engine that we have created, we are now taking that and we have put this new widgets which tracks the progress of that particular example, those examples that I took. So you can see the burn down directly without having to pull this data out and track it somewhere else. So this is another big part of VMDR, which is end-to-end, starting with asset discovery, inventory, vulnerability management in continuous mode, threat feed, threat detection, and then ability to create customizable prioritizations that are very based on actual risk factors and very customizable. I think I said customizable, so I'm repeating that because it is very customizable. And that really gives you now this unique workflow. So very excited, this rolled out already, and we've enabled a bunch of our customers. We're getting a lot of good feedback on this, and really I hope you like the demo, and really looking forward to getting feedback. So as you saw, there were a lot of things that we were able to showcase in the demo. The good news is that as we are rolling out VMDR, we are also rolling out a lot of the components of VMDR as an experience of UI to our existing customers as well, who are non-VMDR customers, so that they can get some of the advantages that are being rolled out. And this is again, because we are a SaaS-based platform, I think this is something that really provides that unique ability for us to give a lot of the dashboards and some of the sensors and all of that included as part of that solution. And then of course from that you can upgrade to actually full VMDR version. So this will be rolled out over the next few weeks to all of our customers. Another update I wanted to provide was in a response for the current COVID-19 situation, Qualys launched about 10 days ago the ability to provide a 60-day free remote endpoint protection service for all of our existing customers, and for any organizations that need badly to be able to keep an eye on the remote endpoints. This is some completely changed the landscape in the last few weeks, I would say, given that everybody's working from home, and a cloud-based solution like Qualys really provides that ability to keep an eye on all of the remote endpoints out there, no matter where they are, because of the cloud-based capability. Today we provide this capability not only for vulnerability management, but also looking at security hygiene, something that's available for Windows already. We are working on a Mac version. You have the URL here. This is going really well. We are seeing a lot of customers are adopting this right now. Agents are being rolled out, and this is bringing some really quick immediate value, so people can start working on deploying this without having to worry about how to get this procured and all of that, right? So sign up will enable this, so you can really start to focus on your endpoint, and that leverages all the components that a lot of the components, I should say, that VMDR are included as part of VMDR. And so the 60-day service is being rolled into the VMDR and the VMDR experience UI, as I mentioned earlier as well. One of the exciting things that we are doing, again, because of the ability for our platform to scale without any additional installation of anything, we are working on expanding that remote service. to be able to also detect malware on the same system. So without deploying any new agent or any new infrastructure or backend or anything like that, starting early May, we will also roll out the ability to figure out if any of these machines that are remote also are being infected by malware. And so that should help additionally for security teams to prioritize their efforts on which assets may be posing a risk to their environment. All of this is possible today because of our cloud-based platform and the architecture, which is extremely simple. You have the sensors that are collecting a large amount of information, sending it to the backend, very powerful backend that we have built that is able to analyze and assess this information, correlate this against threats, against asset. With all of this requires a lot of crunching that has to be done. And today, of course, we have done a lot of the hard work. Our engineering team has completely gone through our own digital transformation of the platform. So with that, we are able to index trillions of data points in Elasticsearch. We're doing billions of messages in Kafka. And that's why, as you saw in the demo, we are able to bring that type of speed and agility to figuring out what are the threats in the environment, even though we are crunching through a huge number of data points here.